Hi fellow travelers, this is Chris from Better Together Travel Stories. Today we're going to talk about Airbnbs. Stephanie and I have stayed in over 19 Airbnbs. This year we've stayed in 4 already and we have 4 more planned for the next 12 months. It is our preferred accommodations and something that we really have spent a lot of time in research and understanding how best to maximize our Airbnb experience. In fact, it's the number one question that we get asked by friends, families, followers. How did you find that great place to stay? Recently, there have been some YouTube videos that I've seen and TikToks that have shared not great experiences with Airbnb. So while this video is in no way sponsored by Airbnb, we thought we would share our experiences and just some thoughts and feedback that we've gotten from others in terms of how to have a great Airbnb experience. In a future video, we'll share the Airbnb experiences that we had in 2021, and that will probably become a recurring theme for us because it's something that people really ask for. So, let's talk about some of the tips that we have for finding the best Airbnb experience. Okay, let's talk research. By the time we select an Airbnb, I probably have spent upwards of anywhere from 2 to sometimes 6-7 hours researching the Airbnb. Why? Because there are literally hundreds of them out there. And it's an embarrassment of riches, really. Being able to be hyper-focused on what makes the most sense for you in terms of location, the size, the budget, the amenities. And so for us, it's important to take the time to really research and make sure that the places that we've selected are the ones that are going to make the best experience for us. Now, I'll probably say this a couple times in this video. Staying in Airbnb is not for everyone. If putting in this type of research is not what you want to do, if you just want to stay at a super chain or a local hotel that you can pull off of Expedia, hey, there's no issues with that at all. But for us, for me specifically, this is actually something I really enjoy doing because it really adds to the story of our whole adventure. There are a few basic options that are pretty much required for us any place we go to. First is that we always select the entire place. We don't share a room, we don't share a house. That's both for our safety as well as our comfort. Second is Wi-Fi. Because many of our adventures, we're actually working while we're away. It's important that we're not having to use our hotspot as much as we would if we were staying at a place that did not have Wi-Fi. We'll also go through the review and check to see if anyone's commented on the speed of the Wi-Fi. It hasn't been an issue, especially outside the US. We find that Wi-Fi is just a great experience for us. Next up is a kitchen. Even if we're not cooking, the convenience of having a sink and having a refrigerator is a real bonus for us. Particularly if we're eating out, being able to have some leftovers that we can take and put in the refrigerator is great. Also, when we're working, we'll typically spend that first afternoon or evening going out to the market or to the grocery store, picking up a few items and having those for breakfast and lunch the next day and all the days that we're there. Next up is a kitchen. We have a kitchen even though in many cases we're not cooking, but having a refrigerator and having a sink gives us a lot of options either for if we have leftovers, being able to store them refrigerated, or especially if we're working, we can actually go to the grocery store or the market and stock up on items that we would have for breakfast and lunch for the days that we're there. Next is air conditioning or heating. You'll be surprised that there are some locations that either don't have air conditioning, but they're in a climate that you would expect there to be some sort of air conditioning, or they don't have heating. Maybe it's because it's typically only used by the owners during the on season, and so because of that, they don't have heating requirements. In either case, make sure you're comfortable with the lack thereof of either air conditioning or heating, given the time frame that you want to visit. And then for stays that are 5 days or longer, we'll usually see if there's a washer and dryer. These are negotiable. We'll typically not select those and see just what inventory is available. And if we're trying to winnow down to a smaller list, we may actually select washer and dryer. It's nice to have on longer stays just so that we're not having to carry around dirty clothes or have to find a laundry service. Next is self-check-in. Again, this is one of those options that is not a requirement for us, but if we're finding there's just a lot of options out there, we may select this just to winnow the list down a little bit smaller. And then price. Again, you may not find that it's cheaper to stay in an Airbnb. And if that's important to you, then select an alternative type of accommodation. But in many cases, we'll find that there's a variety of price points in which you can find a place to stay. For example, if we're staying, say, in South America, and the average price is $100, we may actually filter down to between $25 to $75. That means we're not staying at the upper end, which in some cases may be a little bit inflated, and we're not staying at the lower end that may have some risks or less amenable type of facilities for us. Also note that in selecting based upon price, that once you go in and put the dates that they're choosing, that the seasonality may impact that default price that you see. I'll admit that some of these are hot off the press, given some of the things I've recently seen on YouTube and in TikTok videos. First, read the fine print. Understand how Airbnb works. It is a platform that sits between you as the Airbnb guest and the Airbnb host. Yes, there is a defined level of responsibility and accountability that Airbnb offers to you as the Airbnb guest. But in return, they have very clear expectations in terms of communication, payment, taking care of the home that are our obligation. Many times when I see articles that people have had a bad experience, it usually comes down to something within the expectation of Airbnb or the Airbnb host that weren't met or abided by. It could also be just down to just plain old good old-fashioned lack of communication. Also, make sure you're aware of the cancellation policy for the places that you're looking to stay. For us, if the place only has a cancellation policy of, say, 24 or 48 hours, we'll typically decline those. If it's something that we're really interested in, we'll wait till we have our flights booked and everything is 100% committed before we'll go ahead and push the reserve button. Sometimes we'll miss out on a place, but that's a level of risk that we just choose not to take. Our ideal are the places that will give you up to, in some cases, 3 days, 7 days before your stay that you can get a cancellation with a full refund. But again, based upon what your level of risks are and how committed you are to a particular destination and time, you'll just want to kind of be aware of what the cancellation policy is. Also, note that the cancellation policy becomes different if when you arrive that there's something that's not up to expectations per what you viewed in the pictures or the description provided by the host. This is very important, and it's something I think even recently people didn't take advantage of. For us, I always take a picture of all the rooms and the entire location once we arrive. If there's something that's significantly out of place, I'll use the Airbnb platform to contact the host and either ask for some sort of consideration or in some cases just make them aware of it. For example, hey, the faucets are leaking. It's not a big deal, but I want to let you know. That also kind of helps you so that there's no misunderstanding at the end of your stay as to what issues arose when you were there and which ones already existed prior to your arriving. For example, earlier this year, we were back in Cancun and stayed at an Airbnb that when we arrived looked a little bit different from the pictures. What we uncovered was that in this case, the host had several apartments at that building. And the one they gave us was not the same one that was in the picture. The furniture wasn't quite as nice, and we just felt that we weren't getting exactly what we had asked for. Still, we were happy staying there, and so I reached out to the host and actually shared with him pictures of where we stayed and compared it to the place that we actually had in our itinerary. Come to find out, it was a mistake made by the front desk in which room they gave us. But he actually gave us about $100 off our stay to say thank you and admit the fact that there was a mistake made on their part. Another thing to look at are the service fees. I feel this is an area that Airbnb could do a little better job of policing this because it's a way for, in my view, Airbnb hosts to get a little more money out of you without having to expressly have it listed as part of the cost for a stay. For example, you may find two places that look kind of similar, but one is $75 and the other one is, say, $60 a night. But then when you go to reserve, you'll find out that the one that was for $75 may only have a $100 service fee, whereas the one that was for the lesser amount may have a higher service fee, basically wiping out the benefits from the cost perspective that you thought you were going to get. So be aware of that, particularly when you're actually starting to compare and putting the dates in and coming up with that final list of where you're going to stay at. Another tip is to read all the reviews. And by all, I mean all the reviews. It's really important because this is going to be the best way to have some level of awareness of what you're investing your time in terms of a stay. And in fact, I'll read those reviews up until the day that we leave, just to make absolutely sure that there's nothing that's arisen in terms of a challenge or an issue that hasn't been addressed by the Airbnb host. If there's anything that seems awry, reach out to the host through the Airbnb platform and make them aware of it and ask if this is something that has been resolved. For example, you may find that the last tenant stayed and said, hey, it was 90 degrees out and the air conditioning wasn't working. You'll want to make sure to reach out to the host before you get there and say, hey, I noticed in the last review that the air conditioning wasn't working. Has this been resolved? Again, it's important to do all this in the app so that you have a record that Airbnb can go back and look at should something arise once you do get to the property. And here's a big one. Keep all the communication between you and the Airbnb host in the Airbnb app. I'll say it again. All communication related to your stay, have all of that within the Airbnb app. Probably the number one thing that I find when I read reviews and see TikTok videos and YouTube videos about problems that people have had, it all comes down to the lack of communication within the Airbnb app. Because if it's outside the app, Airbnb is very clear that they can't help you. Again, they sit between the Airbnb host and you as the guest. If you are working outside of that communication chain, frankly, there are times where there's people out there that will masquerade using various apps a conversation that didn't take place. So this is a way that Airbnb can kind of make sure that they're 100% aligned with understanding what transpired in terms of conversation. We do know that outside the US, WhatsApp is a very common platform for communication, for messaging, for video, for phone calls, and we do use it. And in fact, we've had Airbnb hosts that have reached out to us over WhatsApp or even over email. In general, we're okay with that, as long as this conversation is about things like restaurants to choose from or how to get to the location. That is perfectly fine. But once the conversation changes to something that is related to your stay, transition it over into the app itself. For example, our stay in Guayaquil, Ecuador, we found out that we had a really early morning flight. And our stay was only until the next evening, the prior evening. So I reached out over the app and asked if we could go ahead and extend our stay, knowing that we would only need it till about 2 o'clock in the morning. The person replied back over WhatsApp, and we had a conversation and actually even negotiated pricing. Once we got to that point, though, I went back into the app and continued the conversation there. And they were actually able to use the Airbnb app to charge me specifically for the amount of time that we're going to stay over into the next day. Again, use the Airbnb app for any communication related to your stay. Another tip is to remember that an Airbnb is not a hotel. We've seen more and more Airbnbs equip themselves in terms of toiletries, towels, and the like a hotel. And in some cases, you may be staying in a place that is actually set up as a condo hotel. For our own comfort, we do typically take our own soaps and shampoos and the like, just because we want to make sure that we have the best experience that we can at the stay. And we don't want to presume, particularly in European countries, that we'll have more than one towel or even a washcloth. So if you're comfortable, particularly in Europe, having one towel and one washcloth or one towel and a hand towel, you should be fine. But for us, we actually purchased a small set of towels and washcloths from Walmart that if we leave them there, we're perfectly fine with that, or sometimes throw them away after a couple of trips. But again, this is trying to find that balance between the benefits and the adventure that we have staying in an Airbnb with the realization that we don't have the conveniences that you would get in a hotel. Okay, now here's a tip or a trick, depending upon how you look at it, that is probably a little bit more work than most people want to put in. I love trying to identify where exactly the Airbnb is before I make my reservation. I know. So if you've used Airbnb before, you know that they'll give you kind of a general area where your stay is located at. What we found is that can be hit or miss. If you're staying someplace where there's a lot of activities and things that you want to do, see, and go to in that general area, then you're perfectly fine. For us, I really like to have a sense of what the neighborhood's going to be like, where the local grocery stores are, and things like that. And so because we can't get the address until we make the reservation, a lot of times what I'll do is go in and take a look at all the pictures. I'll try to see if there's any identifying landmarks in terms of stores or buildings or street names. And then I'll go into Google Maps and go into Street View, and I'll try to figure out exactly where it is. Stephanie will tell you, I will just be beaming when I actually locate the exact place where we're going to be potentially staying, and actually can show her a street view of where everything is in terms of the grocery stores and the restaurants. So again, this may be something totally outside of what you're comfortable doing or really want to spend the time on, and probably leads a lot into why I'll spend upwards of 8 hours on location. But because Airbnb does want to have some level of security for the Airbnb host, it's not something that they make readily available. But if you want to put the time in, most likely you can actually find the exact location of where you're interested in staying. And that's it. Like I mentioned, there's been a rash of just bad experiences that have been communicated through YouTube and through TikTok. And I just thought, just because of our experiences, it'd be nice to kind of balance this out a bit. I sympathize and empathize with people that have not had the best experience. Perhaps they had an Airbnb host that just wasn't as friendly as they thought they would be, or they got to their stay and it just didn't look the same way it did in the pictures. That said, I do think that Airbnb does a good job of providing resources and services to help make a not so great experience better. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please click on the like button, and do consider following us and subscribing so you can see more of our videos. We're also on TikTok now, so you can find us at b2g.travel, as well as our website, b2g.travel, and on Facebook at Better Together Travel Stories. Thanks, and great adventures ahead for you.